evil, unhinged, perverse. These are all words that have been used to describe Andrzej Żuławski's 1981 film Possession. People have debated its meaning since its release, interpreting the film as a warning of the horrors of divorce, a commentary on geopolitics, doppelgangers, surveillance culture, or how to safely care for that really weird octopus you stole from the zoo. But the thing that struck me when I watched Possession for the first time was the food. Food in film is often designed to appeal to our senses, to connect with the simpler pleasures of life. Perhaps more than any other image, the one we're most familiar with is that of a mother cooking dinner for her family. We've seen this image countless times, often associating it with comfort, nostalgia, feeling safe and nurtured. But what's different about the use of food in Possession is that it makes you feel the opposite of all those things. The characters are eating or preparing food in a way that makes us feel sick or disgusted. It even becomes hard to watch. There is no specific meal being made, just a handful of ingredients manipulated into a mushy, unrecognisable form, certainly not anything we might want to taste. Often the scenes that follow are filled with violence and blood, with heated arguments between the two main characters, Anna and Mark, played by Isabella Gianni and Sam Neill, that fill us with dread and anxiety.
But don't you come any closer!
Anna, it's me!
But don't you understand? You disgust me!
The idea of Anna preparing dinner for her family becomes gross, disturbing, and most of all, abject, which lends itself to a greater meaning, one that relates to Anna's position within her family and the confines of a patriarchal society, a person that has been bent and manipulated into a role that doesn't suit her needs or desires, much like the food she prepares. There are 4 key scenes that centre around the characters either eating or preparing food, which can be divided into 2 categories, men eating food and women preparing food. Not so surprisingly, both have very different meanings, but for now let's focus on the latter and one scene in particular. Anna is using a meat grinder, turning the handle to churn out slimy strands of meat. We aren't sure what she's cooking. The ingredients being used don't help us to recognise any specific meal or recipe. All we see is raw meat being squeezed into a formless pulp that leaves bloodstains on the otherwise spotless counter. The bright red is a stark contrast to the clinical white colour scheme of the rest of the house, which feels cold and devoid of any life or character. This simple action sets up a very specific tone for the rest of the scene. The sight of a mother/wife preparing dinner fills us with a sense of unease. What follows is a sudden screaming match between Anna and Mark, which quickly escalates to hysterical shouting, crying and even violence. We are left with the image of a broken couple, dripping in blood, split by the very knives that Anna was using moments before. In this scene, Żuławski turns our own expectations against us. There is nothing comforting or familiar about Anna preparing this meal for her family. The traditional mother/wife figure has been turned into a grotesque spectacle, with Żuławski asking whether this has ever been natural, whether this is something we should be comfortable seeing, whether there is something wrong with us for expecting women to be domestic and submissive. In Żuławski's hands, this archetype becomes ugly and primal, forcing us to question our own complicity in its existence. Another example of this is the infamous subway scene. Anna returns from the shops with some groceries and has what can only be described as a complete psychotic breakdown. She miscarries in the subway tunnel. A strange yellowy-green liquid leaks out of her as she flings the food from the bags and smears it over the floor and walls. Eggs and tomatoes smashed over the tiles. The ingredients are trampled upon and become mixed with Anna's own blood and vomit. You could argue that this moment is somewhat cathartic for Anna. There's a sense that she is freeing herself of something that was suppressing her. The very thing that restricts Anna's freedom is her duties as a wife and mother, and in this scene she shakes and screams herself free of these duties, the food serving as a symbol of her entrapment by the patriarchy and the standards forced on her by Mark. Plenty of women will no doubt relate to this extreme release of anger, this visceral protest against the unrealistic ideals and standards that dictate our lives. As Anna's baby dies, she is somewhat reborn, and even if this moment has positive connotations for Anna, the scene itself is extremely hard to watch, almost unendurable. But what about the scenes in the film that show men eating food? How are these moments different? When Anna rides the subway, there is a man sitting next to her eating a banana, who takes it out of her bag. In another scene, Mark hires someone to follow Anna, who stops to buy a hot dog. No director would make the effort to highlight such strange and seemingly random details without some deeper purpose or meaning, so what do both foods have in common? Possession is about the presence of power in relationships, and the food in the story represents Anna's lack of autonomy and the suppression of her identity as she is contorted into the role of the wife. This explains why she attempts to regain control over her life by having a relationship with the tentacle creature that possesses her. Perhaps it was the other way round. It's surely no coincidence that Żuławski chose phallic-shaped foods, the hot dog and banana, a slightly more on-the-nose representation of the power the men in Anna's life hold over her. Possession is unrelenting, a brutal look at what it means for a woman to have her life taken from her, to be a slave to the patriarchy. But in her own way, Anna manages to take back control. When you watch the subway scene, as disturbing as it is, it's hard not to think, good for her.